lot to discuss when it comes to Donald Trump and the law. Former federal prosecutor Renato Mariotti, he joins Rick Smith to talk the cases and their timelines. Here's Rick.
Interesting news around the Trump trial. I've seen lots of tweets. I've seen lots of information. I've said from the beginning, and I'll stake my ground right here. I think Trump will be found guilty eventually. He's not going to jail. So the fantasy of he's going to be orange suited up and behind bars with a tin cup singing, woe is me. I don't think that's ever going to happen. I also don't think there's going to be a trial before the election. So please stop with all the we got him. I'm not falling for the Mueller thing again. I'm not doing it. But here to share some thoughts on maybe what we can expect, some realistic ideas of what we can expect out of this trial. I've asked our good friend Renato Mariotti to come talk with us. He's a former federal prosecutor, so he should know. I don't know, he's kind of done this stuff before. He should know better than the bubblegum lawyer on Twitter. He's also the host of the It's Complicated podcast. Wherever you get your favorite podcast, you will find It's Complicated. Renato, thanks for taking time for us.
Absolutely. Happy to be here, Rick.
So let's start right with this. Any chance that the trial is done before the election so that he's guilty before the election? Any chance of this?
No, because we just found out recently that Trump's team does not want that to happen. The only way this was going to go to trial before the election is if Trump's team wanted to have the trial before the election. And I'll just tell you that, and I know I'm going to get a lot of angry responses on this. Just to be crystal clear, that's not because it's Donald Trump. Rick, if you were indicted for some complex case with 400,000 documents in discovery involving classified documents, and you wanted to not have a trial before 2025, I'll tell you right now, we wouldn't have a trial before 2025. Like that's not hard. It's not hard to delay in the federal criminal justice system when you have a very complex case. It's just the reality of how our system works.
No, look, I've known people who have had state charges. It's been 3-4 years before they eventually went to trial. They just kept stalling and delaying. Evidently there are thousands of ways where a qualified lawyer, someone who knows how the system works, to slow the wheels down a little bit. Not that the wheels move all that fast in our justice system, but if you really wanted to throw a wrench into this system, there's a bunch of ways. No, I mean you're
Yes.
the lawyer. There's a bunch.
100 different ways, and generally speaking, I mean, what's unusual about what Trump's team is doing is they're putting their cards on the table early. So typically, it's just sort of death by 1,000 cuts, so to speak. I have a case, for example, a big fraud case that was indicted in 2020. It's now mid 2023. It's likely going to get continued into 2024. That's just the reality of our judicial system, where there's a lot of people are backed up. You've got lawyers who have busy schedules and other trials. When there's voluminous discovery that gets produced over time by the government, everyone's got to review that. And defense attorneys, if they want to file motions, for example, they can delay things in that regard. Sometimes, for example, defendants fire their attorneys. When I was a federal prosecutor, I had one defendant fire 4 different attorneys in the same case to drag the case on for many years because he had figured out a way to escape from prison. True story. He did not want to change. He did not want to change facilities, so he kept firing his attorneys. He eventually escaped from prison like a week after I convicted him at trial because he had figured out how to keep him. The way to keep yourself in the prison that was right next to the courthouse was to keep firing your attorneys and delaying your trial date. So it's really not hard to do. And as a practical matter, to me, this is not even really news. The only thing that's interesting about it is certain arguments they're making or the way they're doing it, which is kind of ham-handed.
So why is this going to get you any angry comments? I mean, everybody knows this, especially if you have money. I mean, this is, we know there are two justice systems, one for the very wealthy and one for everybody else, especially the poor. So why would this revelation that I think everybody should have known already, why would this get you any angry comments?
I don't know. I've been fielding angry comments for the last 48 hours or so, Rick. Lots of people very vitriolic anger towards me. I think it's because people don't want for example, when I tell them something they don't want to hear, they get upset at me. And I try to make sure people understand I didn't create the criminal justice system in the United States. I don't have the power to change it. It would be like really neat if I did, if I could create a system from scratch based on what I thought the justice would be. It would be a very different system. We'd spend a lot more time focusing on white collar crime instead of focusing on on sort of nonviolent, drug offenses, things like that. So I would have a very different criminal justice system, but the fact of the matter is this is the system we have. I'm describing it the way it is, and it is what it is. I said, Rick, right after Trump was charged, I wrote a column in Politico where I'm a columnist, and I said he's not going to get tried before the election. And this was before any recent developments. It's common sense. Like if you actually have practiced federal criminal law, you know that that's going to happen.
No, I'm just a dumb truck driver. And I said the only way he gets this trial before the election is if he believes he can win. Otherwise, he's going to play the victim card as long as he can. He's going to play that out to the faithful base as long as he can. And if by some miracle he wins, can he then pardon himself? Because I said he'll just pardon himself. Can he? Let's say he is, or does it just end? Does he put someone in the Department of Justice who said, no, we're not going to pursue this anymore?
Yeah, I mean, he could try to pardon himself. It's never happened where a president's pardoned himself. So who knows what would come of that, what the courts would think of that. He could try to just shut down the Justice Department or put some stooge. Jeffrey Clark as Attorney General, right? Yeah. Who the heck knows? I mean, he certainly would have the power to do that. It would be very corrupt and it would be arguably some offense, but who's going to prosecute him for it? Who knows what's going to happen obviously, frankly, our system of our constitutional system is over in that circumstance. But the reality is that is the stakes for the upcoming election. And that's why I'll just say, one message that I've probably said, Rick, because this is not my first rodeo when it comes to legal analysis. Okay. I've been doing ever since Trump got elected, I've been speaking out about abuses of power. I've been speaking out about, the potential for the rule of law being, ended in our country. And one thing I've always said to people is please do not put your faith in a bunch of prosecutors in Washington or elsewhere to save America. Okay. You have to get off your and mobilize and save America yourselves. That's the reality of it. I felt the same way when Robert Mueller was supposedly going to indict him for some grand conspiracy with Putin. I thought that was absurd. And now this idea that, look, I thought he was going to be indicted for these documents because it was so obvious, but I don't care who you are. He didn't need to be Donald Trump. He could have been a 77-year-old truck driver. The bottom line is if you're 77 years old or however old he is, 76 years old, you're going to delay. Like, why would you want to rush to a trial? So he's going to delay. And of course you can do that in our system. It's just the reality of
that's the other part of it. No, he's a rich guy with money. He's an older guy. You could probably take this as long as he wants until he finally expires. But the other part of this, and you're listening to the Rick Smith Show here with Renato Mariotti, former federal prosecutor and host of the It's Complicated podcast, wherever you find your podcasts. It's Complicated will be there. Hosted by our friend here, Renato. But there's a lot of thoughts that going around that this judge and this Aileen Cannon, who appointed by Trump, is going to pull some shenanigans. Do you have any concern about that?
Oh, for sure, I do. Just to be clear, this is something I talked about a lot, and It's Complicated. I think we did like an episode several weeks ago about this, all the different ways she could tank the trial for Trump. Just to be clear, this is like not even the high on the list. She could literally, once the jury's impaneled, essentially grant a motion that would essentially end the case that's not reviewable by a court of appeals. So there's all sorts of ways she could tank the case. I will just say that this current motion in front of her, I think most judges, I don't know if they'd grant the motion. What most judges would do is they'd say, okay, I'll set a trial date for now, like let's say next summer, but I'll entertain any motions in the future to reconsider that and to move it because we don't even know what the discovery is going to look like. The government has produced over 400,000 documents. They said they have more productions to come. As things develop, as motions get filed, we'll move the trial date. That's probably what most judges would say, or they'd say, we don't need to worry about this for now. Like I'll push out, I'm going to take this under advisement and just deal with it later once they have more of a sense of things. But very, very few judges are going to be on board with Jack Smith trying to bulldoze the defendant into having a trial in like under a year. over the objections of his attorneys who were saying they don't have time to prepare and they have too many other cases in their docket and they can't review the documents and they can't file the motions. Like, he's not going to want no judge going to want to try that case over and over again after appeals. So they're not going to do that.
Did you say 400,000 documents?
Yeah. And this is a classified documents case. So there's all sorts of extra BS that goes into discovery. And by the way, Trump's team hasn't asked for their own discovery yet. I mean, they're probably going to, if they're smart to slow things down, what they're going to do is they're going to make their own discovery request. They're going to ask for all sorts of other classified documents that the government doesn't want to give up and say that those are necessary for their defense. And those decisions are all going to be litigated out. It's going to take time. And by the way, under SIPA, which is the law that governs this classified document stuff, you can get an immediate appeal. So usually appeals are at the end of the case. You can have what's called an interlocutory appeal. You can go up immediately for appeal. So how many of those do you think there's going to be? I mean, as I said, you don't even need to be imaginative to figure out how this team is going to find ways to delay this. This case won't go to trial for a long time.
So let me ask you I guess the question on everyone's mind: does it ever happen? Does Trump ever step foot in a courtroom? Is he ever held accountable? Because look, I mean, Exhibit A is him admitting that he had the classified documents. Him saying, yeah, I had the boxes. It was in the boxes. My stuff was in the boxes. You didn't think I was going to give you my stuff. My stuff was in those boxes. My stuff's more important than your stuff, you and your classified documents that I'm allowed to have anyway. He admitted it. It's right there. It's cut and dry. Does he ever go to trial?
It's a great question. I think it depends on whether Aileen Cannon forces his hand on that. In other words, because he's old enough where he could try to run out the clock not try out the clock, but just, keep going until he, passes away. I think it would, in a typical courtroom, and I practice currently as a defense attorney now all over the country. I would say in a typical courtroom, I would see, 3 or 4 years of delay in a case like this. Okay. 2 to 4, let's just say. And it depends on how fast the judge is. At a certain point, judge will just say, I've had a judge tell me earlier this year in a case, okay, Mr. Mariotti, we're going to trial. I understand that the speedy trial right's on your side, but we need to move this case. We're going to go to trial this year. That's it. And ultimately, the Court of Appeals do not reverse trial judges on these sort of scheduling issues. And so he can, at a certain point, once he feels like I've had my chance to make my motions to get my discovery, they could do that. But in a case like this, with so much discovery and so many issues and so complicated, and then you have the election. Are they really going to say we're going to have the trial in the middle of the Republican convention or in the middle of the, 2 months before the election? Like, there's so many months and that are not even going to work next year, right? I mean, are you going to really do this in November? Like, I just don't see that. Just don't see it.
No, it's never going to go to trial before the election because, as you pointed out, and so eloquently so, there are so many ways. 400,000 documents that they've already said there's probably more. Wow. Now my mind is maybe this never happens. I said he'll eventually be found guilty, but he's never going to jail. Now I'm reevaluating this all because now I'm going to be angry. I got to reevaluate.
You can be angry at me. You can be angry at me like everyone else, Rick. But by the way, he does have other indictments. He's got the indictment in Manhattan, which is not a very strong case in comparison.
Right.
Okay, it's a much weaker case. That's the case you'd probably want to do first if you're in the Trump team because it's the weaker one. That one's set for trial next year. That might get delayed. Who knows? A lot less complicated of a case. You got the Fulton County. He's probably going to get indicted there. He might get indicted the January 6th thing. But, the fact that he's indicted in multiple jurisdictions also gives him more reason to say he's his team's overwhelmed and he's got all these different trials to schedule and juggle. He's in a very, very bad position, but it's not like he's 23. Okay. Right. He's, 76 or something?
Like
he's
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. He doesn't have a lot of time left, but here's the thing. Out of all of this stuff, and this is kind of where I want to wrap this up. There's a lot. It's almost like he could have shot somebody on Fifth Avenue and gotten away with it. Cause is he ever going to be held accountable for any of this stuff? Because it seems like it's so much that it's almost like, well, yeah. Okay.
It's an interesting thing, Rick. I'll just say this from the experience of somebody who goes through this on a regular basis. For some of my clients, just getting indicted it destroys their life, right? Their businesses go kaput. I've had multiple clients consider committing suicide. I've had their marriages get destroyed. I mean, so much happens to people when they get indicted.
Yeah.
The fact that this guy is going to be indicted multiple times, already been indicted twice, that is a lot of more accountability than a lot of people see in this country. There's lots of white collar criminals out there who never get prosecuted because their case is too hard to prove. But yeah, I think, will he get a conviction? Yes. The question is just when. If he becomes reelected as president, he may not get a federal conviction. And we are going to have way bigger problems on our hands than arguing about this criminal case if Donald Trump becomes the president again. So everyone listening to this, I want to get off your butts and do something about that, and do everything you can to make sure that we get Joe Biden reelected.
There you go. If you're that angry at Renato for coming out with the truth, maybe point that anger, that energy, that all that vitriol in a direction to ensure that he never becomes president again.